London, 1854. The scream was muffled by wool and filth. The body hit the floor with a dull thump barely audible over the fire crackling in the hearth. Lord Wexley didn't even look up from his leather-bound volume of Cicero. His valet, Thomas, had been acting strange, all weak-flushed cheeks, a quiet tremor in his hands. The faint scent of rot trailing him down the corridors like a forgotten meal. But this was different. This was final. The doctor arrived an hour later, his boots echoing down the marble hallway. He knelt over the still form of Thomas, his nose twitching as he leaned in. Then he pulled back sharply, not from shock, from the stench. It wasn't alcohol, not disease, not the heavy perfumes that sometimes masked infection in the city's dying men. It was something older, more grotesque, like damp wool rotting from the inside. It clung to Thomas's skin like a second layer of death. Lord Wexley, mildly irritated, stood by the mantel with a glass of port in hand. "Another fever, I presume?" The doctor shook his head, slowly. "No," he said. "Something, festering. A skin infection gone septic. Likely from prolonged contact." "Contact with what?" The doctor hesitated. Then, "Your undergarments, my lord." For a brief second, the room was silent except for the slow hissing burn of the fire. It was true. Thomas had worn Lord Wexley's cast-off drawers for nearly 2 months. Washed only once in that time. Heavy, tight woolen things. Made to last, made never to be questioned. In a house like this, no one asked when a garment was last laundered, least of all the men who wore them. That day, Lord Wexley did not finish his port. What most people today don't understand is how intimately disgusting the average Victorian man's daily routine was. The filth wasn't a symptom of poverty, was embedded in the structure of refinement. Cleanliness, at least in the inner layers, wasn't fashionable. In fact, it was quietly discouraged. Underneath every starched collar and bespoke coat was a trap. A private hell stitched into linen and flannel. The average upper-class man changed his shirt daily but his undergarments weekly, if that. Some wore the same long johns for over a month. No one wanted to talk about it. Certainly not the men themselves. To discuss one's underwear was to reveal one's body. And in Victorian England, nothing was more offensive than acknowledging the fact that a manavan, a noble one, had genitals. The garments themselves were marvels of discomfort. Long, stiff drawers of wool or coarse linen that trapped heat and sweat, sewn tight, pulled high, and buttoned up to the ribs. There were no elastic waistbands, just drawstrings and pins. The wool itched, but you weren't supposed to complain. It was manly to endure it. Masculine suffering, after all, was part of the image. For some, it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was deadly. Take the case of Edward Holloway, a clerk who worked at the Bank of England. He arrived every morning at precisely 8 o'clock, his waistcoat pristine, his top hat straight as a ruler. No one noticed the limp in his walk, the way he winced when sitting. Edward hadn't changed his underdrawers in 3 weeks, because he was lazy, but because the laundress charged by the item, and he only owned 2 pairs. On the 22nd day, he collapsed in the lavatory. An abscess had formed along his inner thigh, rubbed raw by the constant friction of dried sweat and unwashed cloth. It had turned gangrene. He was 34. The most absurd part, no one thought it strange. Death by infection was common enough. No one dared link it to something so intimate, so improper. The clothes that lined a man's skin were simply not spoken of. That silence killed more than a few dot in the parlors and smoking rooms of London's. Elite men joked about cholera and typhoid, but not once about boils or rashes. They debated Darwin, flirted with eugenics, but never questioned why half their household staff walked with a limp in winter, or why faint sores blossomed beneath their own waistbands. And God forbid someone suggest laundering more than once a month. The cost, the time, the shame. Even in the most luxurious homes, water was rationed. Heating it took hours, and laundering underclothes, those shamefully close things, was considered a chore of last resort. Often, a man would simply turn his drawers inside out after a week, then again the next. 4 sides to every garment. Efficient, he would say. Behind the grand facades of Belgravia and Kensington, chambermaids scrubbed blood-stained sheets and yellowed drawers until their fingers cracked open. And still, no one talked about it. But there were whispers. Maud, the housemaid of Lord Halbridge, once confided in the cook that her master's garments were so foul they made her vomit while scrubbing. She was dismissed that evening for unladylike sensitivities. A month later, the next maid fainted in the laundry room. Same smell. Same stains. The truth was, these men, these paragons of decorum, walked around in festering swamps of their own making. Under their finery, their skin blistered and bled. And they called it civilization. Lord Wexley didn't attend Thomas's funeral, but a week later, he summoned a tailor. Quietly, without fanfare, he commissioned new undergarments, soft cotton, loose fitting, with instructions to have them washed every 3rd day. He didn't speak of it, not to the tailor, not to the new valet. But from that week forward, the stink around him faded. Not the one in the room, the one beneath the skin, but the silence hadn't vanished. Because the problem wasn't just the garments, it was everything they stood for. And just when the illusion of change seemed possible, something happened that dragged it all back into shadow. His new valet, James, began coughing one night. A wet, rasping sound that echoed down the corridor. By morning, he was gone. Lord Wexley found the old drawers hanging by the washroom door, his old ones. The wool pair he'd forgotten to throw out. James had worn them after all, and this time there would be no doctor. The coroner's report didn't mention the drawers. It listed the cause of death as pulmonary infection, complicated by skin lesions. But Lord Wexley knew. He stood alone, in the servants' quarters, holding the balled-up garment in gloved hands, its wool still damp from wear, still etched with the imprint of James's form. It smelled like death all over again. He didn't cry. That wasn't his way. But something inside him cracked the quiet. Lifelong belief that the world made sense as long as it looked good on the surface. He threw the garment into the fireplace. It hissed, spat, and curled into blackened shreds. But ashes couldn't erase history. That evening, Wexley did something no man of his rank had done in public memory. He stood at the long dining table with his peers, lords, empisand, placed the truth squarely on the mahogany surface between the port glasses. "We're killing our men," he said, quietly, with linen. The room fell still. Someone coughed. Another chuckled. Sir Alistair, red-faced and stiff, cleared his throat. "What the devil are you on about, Wexley?" He didn't blink. "Our undergarments. The habits we keep. The silence. Our valets are dying. We're rotting in cloth made before steam engines, and no one dares say a word because it's beneath our pride." An uneasy pause. Then, "Have you been drinking?" "I buried 2 men in 1 month," Wexley said, "both in service to me, both poisoned by the very things we forced them to wear. And we call that civilization." He didn't expect them to agree. But he didn't expect what came next. One by one, the men stood not in protest, but in retreat. Each made an excuse. "Early day tomorrow. Forgotten correspondence. The wife will be waiting." They left the room like it was cursed, and perhaps it was Wexley was alone again, but not ashamed. The next day, he posted a notice in every paper that would take his money. "To tailors and washwomen of the city, I seek the cleanest, softest, safest undergarments made by English hands, and I will pay triple for them, for my staff and myself. I will not kill another man with thread." It was mocked, of course. A letter in the Times called it the ravings of a spoiled noble playing at reform. Satirical drawings followed caricatures of Wexley battling armies of giant underpants, dueling with laundrymaids. The whispers at court were vicious. But in the East End, laundresses clipped the notice from the paper and pinned it to their walls. At least one man, one of them, had finally spoken the truth. 3 months later, a young boy named Thomas, not that Thomas, but another, fresh from the workhouse, came to Wexley's estate for work. He was given clean cotton undergarments, fresh ones every 2 days, a warm bed, a physician's visit every fortnight. He never limped. Soon, other households followed. Quietly at first, a small shift, no announcements, no fanfare, but it began to spread. Tailors adapted, laundresses charged more. Steam-heated laundries opened just outside the city. A network of silent reform born from the corpses of shame. Still, most men said nothing. Change came not from their words, but from their closets. Behind locked doors, old wool was burned, new flannel stitched in its place. Not because they had found morality, but because they had smelled death on their own skin and flinched. Years passed, and somewhere, in a narrow tenement on the south bank of the Thames, a laundress who once scrubbed Lord Wexley's foul drawers by hand told her daughter, "That's the man who saved our lungs." And in the quiet way history works, that was enough. Wexley died peacefully, many years later. In fresh linens, clean skin, no boils, no boils. And yet, his legacy didn't live in books, it lived in cotton, in soap, in the simple dignity of no longer dying in silence. If this story gripped you, shocked you, or made you see the past in a way you never have before, hit the like button right now.